Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy. Today we've got maybe an unconventional choice as far as astrophotography goes. That is the Tamron 35-150 F2-2.8 zoom lens. What are the other? They always have all these other. Di III VXD. There. This particular lens is for Sony E-mount and astrophotography. This lens, when it came out, made quite a splash. You know, it's a grower and a shower. Ooh, cringy. Yeah, I'm sorry. The use cases for it are not necessarily astrophotography use cases. So as with everything I do a lot of, daytime photography and I do a lot of nighttime photography. And I tend to test pretty much everything on the sky, if only to show what's actually going on, because there's something about pinpoint lights like stars that can do a real good job showing you all the various aberrations and stuff that a lens can actually do or show or has, or you get what I'm saying. I'm ready to be surprised. I haven't looked at the samples yet, so who knows what's going to happen, but let's just take a really quick view. We've got custom button, AFM switch. Here we've got, I believe this is for the stabilization, custom 1, 2, 3, another custom button here. Another custom button here. Oh, 3 custom buttons. And over here we actually have a lock switch, which locks the zoom ring and prevents it from creeping. Tamron does have a gasket here on the flange, and we've got a, as you would expect, a very chunky 82 millimeter filter thread. I don't know what to say. We're gonna find out. Let's do that now. Hey folks, welcome to Lightroom. Today we're looking at another variable aperture zoom lens that's probably suboptimal for astrophotography, but which some of you might want to use for astrophotography. So let's take a look at these samples from the Tamron 35-150 F2-2.8 Di III VXD, I think. Tamron always has such a funny naming convention, isn't it great? So here I have a series of samples that run us through the zoom range, but not through the aperture range. And that's because, from my estimation, if you're going to be using an f2.8 or f2, and it's only f2 for like the first 35 mil to, I don't know, it's very, very small range of f2. If you're going to be using these apertures, these are already pretty slow for astrophotography, so you're not going to really want to stop down to f4. So I just decided I'd stick to focal lengths. I do have 2 samples here taken at 150, and that is because one of them ever so slightly out of focus, but the other one that is in focus actually has a cloud coming through and it got hazy. So, I'm kind of splitting the difference. You'll have to make your own assumptions based on these, but this one in focus, a little more hazy. This one just maybe like a smidge out of focus, or it's also possible I bumped the tripod or something, but here we don't have the cloud coming through and ruining the contrast. So I have this collection. They're all taken with the Sony a7R Mark V 60 megapixel camera. They're all taken at ISO 320, which is that camera's second base ISO. It is a dual gain censored camera. This camera really only has 2 analog amplification stages, one at ISO 100, one at ISO 320. Every other ISO is essentially digitally simulated by the camera. And while that looks nice on the back of the camera, it does bake in some stuff into the file. Namely, it bakes the highlights in at a higher exposure than they otherwise would be, which means you can't recover the highlights if they're blown out in a lot of cases. Now, if you shoot at 320, you get the same noise performance, the same amount of detail in the shadows, you get the same image quality overall, but you also gain the option of retaining, hopefully, some information in the highlights. And that is enough of a reason for me to always shoot at my camera's base ISOs when I'm doing astrophotography. If you want to learn more about that, there's a link in the description. I'll bring you back to my website. Got all kinds of cool articles and stuff there for you, including an article that goes through ISO invariance, which is the concept I'm talking about here, in rigorous detail, which is very informative. It's a really good read if you're into that kind of technical stuff. You'll also find information about the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II on my website, the tracker that I tracked all of these samples with, and that's because Fervent Astronomy is Fornax's North American distributor, which is pretty good for me and pretty good for you because you get some nice, well-tracked samples. So if you want to learn more about that particular tracker, You can find more information there on ferventastronomy.com, along with links to these samples, which I will provide, so that you can click around and really get a good look at them and see if this might be the lens for you. Of course, these are not amazing works of art, but they are my copyrighted work. I did put a lot of effort into getting this stuff for you and putting this review together, so please respect that. Please respect my copyright. Please don't reproduce these files either online or offline or redistribute them. Please don't misrepresent them as your own, and please don't use them as the basis for your own review. I'm providing them in good faith for the purpose of assessing the performance of the lens, and I hope that you will respect that. All right, all that being said, let's jump in here. Please keep in mind these were quite dark. I had to crank the exposure by a couple of stops, so that is going to affect things. Right off the jump here at 35mm f2, we see that we do have some vignetting. The corners are quite dark, and throughout the middle of the frame here, things are a fair bit brighter. Again, I had to crank the exposure, but that is going to mean there's not a ton of information in the corners. As far as contrast, I think there's a little bit of loss of contrast. It is hard to tell because I had to crank the exposure so much, but you know, it is what it is. Let's zoom in here to 400, and overall, we've got some color fringing, a little bit of chromatic aberration maybe. That should be correctable. A little bit of star bloat here, maybe a little bit of spherical aberrations happening, and that will cause bright point sources to bloat out. Overall, not too bad. Coming into the mid-frame, we see some weird star shapes, but I don't see any coma. Coma, or as it's known more technically, chromatic aberration, is what happens when a star gets fuzzy on one side and starts to basically have a fuzzy tail, maybe takes on more of a wedge shape. Chromatic aberration is named after coma from comets, that sort of comet tail, and so coma will look a little bit like a comet tail, a little bit fuzzy, and it'll be either internal coma, where the fuzz is pointing towards the center of the frame, or external, where the fuzz is pointing towards the edges. In this case, I don't see a lot of coma really. What I do see is a bit of astigmatism. Here are some good examples. You see it looks like a little plus or a little fighter jet. This is two types of astigmatism. So you can imagine there's radii from the center to the edge of the frame, and anytime you have a star, it's going to follow along one of those, and it might stretch out in that direction because the lens can't quite focus all that light in a point. That is tangential astigmatism. And then the wings from this particular little space plane, or almost looks like a little space hummingbird, this is sagittal astigmatism. For every radii that you'll find tangential astigmatism along at a 90-degree angle, you may find sagittal astigmatism, which gives it the effect that it rings the frame, because it never truly points towards the center or the edges. And here there is a little bit, and that's what I have to say about that. Astigmatism, not coma, and when these become a problem for me is when they cause these stars around the edges and corners to look odd, to look warped, to look much bigger than the stars at other parts of the frame. And in the case of the astigmatism here, while you can see it really well zoomed in at 400%, it's not as noticeable zoomed out, so I don't really think it would be a big problem, all things considered. Another thing that might happen is something called field curvature. And field curvature is when things are in focus in, let's say, the center, but as you get towards the edges, they might go out of focus. Basically, things aren't flat across the field. The focus isn't flat, so you'll get out of focus stars towards the edges and corners, and I just don't see that happening. Even though we have that astigmatism walking the shapes out a little bit, I wouldn't say that they're really out of focus. So I think that's not really that much of a concern. We will now flip through the different focal lengths here, which you can see here, and watch as the aperture changes and see what we have going on in the frame. So this, of course, is 35mm at f2, and this is 50mm at f2.2. Got some vignetting, still pretty dark in the corners there, a little bit more zoomed in, still have a little bit of blooming around these stars. It is possible that there was a little bit of haze or cloud that might have been making this a bit worse than it otherwise would be. But given that I have a couple of samples where there's definitely some cloud blowing them out, this might be something that you can expect from the lens. So I would keep that in mind. That said, for something like constellations here, this is actually kind of desirable. I have known people put diffusion filters on their lenses to cause this effect, so that they would get the stars blooming out a little bit, because that sort of draws attention to the constellation. So that could be a plus. You aren't going to be out here trying to take photos of the Whirlpool galaxy with this lens, or at least this is not the correct lens for doing that. And out here we can see that while we still have astigmatism, it's still pretty tight, so no field curvature to speak of. Come up here to 70 millimeters at f2.5. So since we're going down to f2.5, things are getting a bit darker. We are still getting really dark corners, and we still have some of that blooming and bloat around the stars here, the bright stars. It's not the worst thing in the world. Fairly tight stars of lower brightness in other parts of the frame though, especially in the center here. Not a lot of chromatic aberration. If we go to the corners, we do still have this astigmatism, but things look mostly in focus, so I don't think we're suffering from field curvature, and coma is still nowhere to be seen, so I don't really think that's a problem. So that's pretty good, all things considered. So zoom in some more at 87 f2.8. I assume I was trying to get to 90 millimeters there, but sometimes the paint marks on the lens aren't always perfect with the actual focal length. Here, still fuzzy, still possible effects of spherical aberration, or possibly a little bit of haze causing some bloom. Still have some astigmatism in the corners, and when you have an especially bright star here, like I think Alcade, you are especially going to notice it. You can see definitely the shape is a little bit weird compared to its companions, which are, you know, quite a bit more round shaped, a little more appropriately shaped for a star. So this is something where you might need to come in after and clean it up in Photoshop or what have you. In this corner, we can see that we definitely have that tangential and sagittal astigmatism still as well. So that's not rectifying as we zoom in. Here at roughly 100 millimeters, again, much the same story, lots of vignetting, still very bloated stars here, a little loss of contrast around the brighter stars. Definitely still have that astigmatism, although it is maybe changing shape a little bit. Maybe just in the bottom left-hand corner, it's a different shape than the top left-hand corner. Overall, it's not changing the look of the frame too much overall. 139 millimeters at f2.8. Actually more vignetting coming into the frame. Still a bit smushy. And we do have some chromatic aberration, a little blue and yellow on some of these stars. That'll be hopefully easy to fix. Bloat is still there, and we are seeing still astigmatism, although it's changing in shape a little bit. It is still there. No field curvature really from what I can tell at any of the focal lengths here. 150, here we are zoomed in all the way, and at the most telly end we still do have these little bloated stars. I'll flip to this next one. You can see here a little bit of cloud comes through and really bloats the stars out quite a bit. And you can see there's a lot of contrast through here. That said, I will include this one because the stars are marginally better focused here. Whereas in this particular frame, I think you can tell that they are out of focus. So that being said, yeah, the astigmatism is still there. Vignetting continues to be very present. Here the blooming hides the astigmatism, whereas without that cloud, even though it's a little defocused, it is a little sharper there. I mean, I'm not surprised. This isn't going to be the best lens for doing astrophotography. I know it's quite good, considered quite a good lens, and that's because something that's good for normal terrestrial photography isn't always the best for astrophotography. This, however, makes a really good video lens, so they each have their strengths. I think that's about all I really have to say about this or point out. You can take a closer look yourselves if you're really interested. But overall, nothing here is especially wow or especially bad, I would say. You know, maybe not if you want to be taking pictures of a bright galaxy or nebula, but to be honest, even Andromeda would be very small at 150 millimeters. The largest nebulas that you can really frame up, like Heart and Soul Nebula, I suppose, or doing all of Orion and with Barnard's Loop and everything, you might do that. That actually might be a benefit, to be honest, to have a little bit of diffusion on the stars if you're going to do something like a constellation like Orion. So this is what I got. Make your own decision. You're an adult, probably, if you're thinking of spending thousands of dollars on this lens. let's pop out of Lightroom and wrap this up. Well, interesting. Personally, I might keep this one to daytime photography, not because there's anything wrong with it, but I'm starting to get sore just holding this. There are some aftermarket tripod collars that you can purchase to kind of clamp on here and put a little tripod foot on it to offload some of that weight. I think that's what I would do if I am going to use it in any capacity for astrophotography. This is not an inexpensive lens. For Tamron, it's actually an expensive lens. So I might try and get some double duty out of it if you already have it. If you already have it and you're doing tracked astrophotography, chances are you're going to maybe have some other optics, but in a pinch, you know what? I wouldn't say no. But my opinion is only my opinion. Ultimately, I'm here to show you, dear viewer, how this lens performs so that you can make up your own mind. So I hope this helped you do that. I hope you found this interesting. And is this the lens for you? For astrophotography? Maybe it is. There's something for everyone out there. So I'm Darren. This has been Fervent Astronomy. Thanks so much.